cash, just pure entitlement. I'm Jeb Thornfield, and that nightmare hit me last April. My heart pounded as my coffee mug shattered on the tile, watching $47,000 in heirloom corn, survivor of the Depression, What You Two, and every crash since, get pulverized into dust. The acrid diesel fog choked the crisp morning air, a stench that haunts me still. But that power-tripping suburban tyrant overlooked one fatal flaw buried in her own HOA charter, a $3.1 million legal landmine I turned against her. After 6 months of patient planning, I smiled as she popped champagne and snipped the ribbon on her victory. Then I detonated my trap. Federal papers that locked her in prison and made me rich beyond my wildest dreams. What would you unleash if a corrupt busybody stole your legacy? Drop your location below. I'm tracking HOA nightmares nationwide. My story starts 3 generations back when my grandfather Ezra Thornfield cleared 47 acres of Missouri bottomland with nothing but an axe, a mule, and the kind of stubbornness that built America. That man planted heritage corn that survived dust bowls, floods, and every economic disaster this country could throw at it. When he passed in '89, my father inherited the legacy. When Dad died 15 years later, it became mine. The farm sits like an island between County Road 47 and what used to be the Peterson place, until Peterson sold out 5 years ago to some hotshot developers from Kansas City. That's when my quiet rural life got complicated. Those developers built Willowbrook Estates, 200 McMansions crammed onto prime farmland, complete with an HOA that makes the IRS look like your favorite uncle. Every morning I'd follow the same ritual. Boots crunching on frost-covered gravel, breathing in coffee brewing mixed with that honest smell of barn and earth. My fingers would trace the rough wooden fence post Grandpa Ezra handset in 1943, listening to wind whisper through 6-foot corn stalks. The sweet scent of morning dew on corn silk always reminded me why this life chose me. Martha used to say those sounds were our ancestors blessing another day's work. My wife of 26 years lost her cancer battle 18 months ago, leaving me to work this land alone. The kids moved to St. Louis and Chicago, city jobs, better opportunities. Can't blame them, but it meant facing every sunrise solo, keeping alive traditions under increasing siege. That siege intensified when Willowbrook arrived with pristine sidewalks, matching mailboxes, and rule books thicker than War and Peace. Property values skyrocketed, sure, but so did my taxes, tripling in 5 years. Suddenly, I'm paying city-level taxes on farmland that's been feeding families since Truman was president. Enter Cordelia Ashworth Pemberton, age 47, HOA president, and my personal nightmare. Picture a woman who moved here from Connecticut suburbs where lawns get measured with rulers and Christmas decorations have court-mandated removal dates. She drives a spotless white BMW X7 and dresses like she's perpetually heading to yacht club meetings that don't exist in rural Missouri. Cordelia started her campaign with noise complaints about my rooster disturbing her sleep wellness schedule. Apparently 5:30 a.m. violates some cosmic suburban law. She escalated to property devaluation lawsuits because my 40-year-old tractor was visible from her development. The woman actually hired a photographer to document my unsightly agricultural equipment, like she was building a federal case. Then came petition drives to rezone my agricultural land, claiming farm equipment created safety hazards on roads that existed when her grandparents were still in diapers. She organized campaigns like a political candidate, complete with color-coded spreadsheets tracking every property code she could twist against me. The declaration of war came at a county planning meeting I couldn't attend. Martha's memorial service demanded my presence among 300 people whose lives she'd touched. While I honored my wife's memory, Cordelia was presenting her traffic solution, with PowerPoint slides showing my front acreage as unused buffer space, perfect for visitor parking. She told county planners that Willowbrook residents needed overflow parking for emergency vehicle access. The audacity of demanding my family's heritage land for her residents' convenience still makes my blood pressure spike. But discovering she'd secretly commissioned surveys claiming boundary disputes over 200 feet of my cornfield, that crossed every line imaginable. Game on. I returned from Martha's memorial service to find bright orange survey stakes piercing through my cornfield like neon tombstones. Each fluorescent marker felt like a personal insult, not just to me, but to every generation of Thornfields who'd worked this soil. The metallic taste of rage filled my mouth as I counted 17 stakes cutting a perfect line 200 feet into my heritage corn. Cordelia didn't waste time with subtlety. Within hours, I found a certified letter in my mailbox claiming her HOA's professional survey revealed serious boundary discrepancies. She presented what looked like a 1950s property deed with convenient water damage obscuring key details, arguing that historical records showed the boundary line extended well into what I'd assumed was my field. The letter's tone dripped with fake concern. Given the unfortunate confusion regarding property boundaries, it read, "We must insist you cease all trespassing activities on HOA property immediately. Continued violations will result in legal action to protect our residents' rights. Trespassing on land my grandfather cleared with his bare hands." I drove straight to the county courthouse, my truck's engine growling louder than usual, or maybe that was just my blood pressure. The courthouse basement smelled like old paper and decades of bureaucratic indifference, but those records told a different story than Cordelia's fairy tale. My deed, recorded in 1943, showed exact boundaries that placed every survey stake firmly on Thornfield property. Armed with photocopies, I marched to Cordelia's front door. Her house screamed suburban perfection, manicured lawn cut to pudding green precision, topiary bushes shaped like something from a Disney movie, and a doormat reading "Blessed" in cursive script. The irony made me want to laugh if I wasn't so furious. She answered wearing tennis whites despite never having touched a racket. I'd actually asked around. Turns out her tennis schedule consisted of brunch at the country club and complaining about property taxes she'd never actually seen. "Jeb, how wonderful to see you. I assume you received our correspondence about the boundary clarification." I spread the official documents across her granite countertop. "These county records show you're dead wrong about property lines. Every stake you planted sits on Thornfield land, recorded and surveyed 3 times since 1943. What happened next should have warned me about her true nature. Instead of backing down like any reasonable person caught in an obvious lie, Cordelia doubled down with the kind of confidence that only comes from unlimited legal budgets. "Oh, sweetie," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "These old documents often contain irregularities that require expensive legal review. My husband's firm specializes in complex property law, and frankly, you seem too emotionally compromised from your recent loss to understand the nuances involved." She actually patted my shoulder like I was a confused child. "Trust me, fighting this will cost you far more than you can afford. We're prepared to take this through years of litigation if necessary. Sometimes it's better to accept reality and move forward." The threat was crystal clear. Surrender or face bankruptcy through legal fees, regardless of who actually owned the land. I remembered reading somewhere that property boundary challenges require clear and convincing evidence to overturn recorded deeds, with the burden of proof lying squarely on the challenger's shoulders. Cordelia had neither evidence nor law on her side, just money and arrogance. My counterattack came through the one weapon small farmers still possess: public opinion. I contacted Marcus Webb at the Millbrook Gazette, a weekly paper that actually cared about local issues. Marcus had covered Martha's community work for years and understood our family's deep roots. Suburban Bully's Target Grieving Farmer ran on the front page 3 days later, complete with a photo of those orange stakes cutting through green corn stalks like wounds in the earth. The article detailed my family's 3-generation history, Martha's recent passing, and Cordelia's immediate assault on our property rights. The response overwhelmed me. 213 online comments, 96% supporting our farm. Local restaurants testified about buying my produce for decades. Former students shared memories of school field trips to see heritage corn varieties. Even complete strangers offered legal help and financial support. But Cordelia's response revealed her true character. Instead of reasonable discussion, she fired back with a letter to the editor that included the phrase, "irregardless of his emotional state," prompting retired English teacher Mrs. Dorothy Hennings to write her own scathing correction letter that made half the county laugh out loud. The public embarrassment should have ended things. Instead, Cordelia escalated by filing formal property disputes with the county, forcing me to hire attorney Janet Morrison at $350 per hour. Those orange stakes stayed planted in my field as evidence, while lawyers argued over land my family had owned since before Cordelia was born. What I didn't realize yet was that this survey scam was just her opening move in a much larger, more dangerous game. While my lawyer battled Cordelia's boundary dispute in court, she was already working a different angle, one I didn't see coming until it was almost too late. 3 weeks after our newspaper war, I got a call from Janet Morrison that made my coffee turn to acid in my stomach. "Jeb, we've got a bigger problem. Cordelia just ambushed the county zoning board with an emergency petition. She's claiming your farm violates residential character standards and requesting immediate rezoning from agricultural to residential. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Cordelia had done her homework, appearing before the county zoning board with a presentation slicker than a Madison Avenue ad campaign. She brought a delegation of HOA residents dressed like Supreme Court justices, armed with glossy folders and rehearsed talking points that sounded like they'd been focus grouped to death. I showed up in work boots and my best flannel shirt, feeling like I'd brought a pitchfork to a nuclear war. Cordelia's presentation was surgical in its precision. She displayed enlarged photographs of my 40-year-old John Deere tractor, Old Blue as Martha used to call him, claiming it created traffic hazards and visual pollution inconsistent with modern residential development. The woman had actually hired a professional photographer to document my unsightly agricultural equipment from every conceivable angle. The sound of her designer heels clicking on courthouse marble echoed like a metronome counting down to my doom. She distributed those glossy folders with the efficiency of a casino dealer, each one containing aerial photos, traffic studies, and property devaluation assessments, supposedly proving how my farm hurt neighboring home values. Ladies and gentlemen, she addressed the board with courtroom authority, we're not asking for anything unreasonable, simply that zoning classifications reflect current reality rather than outdated designations from a bygone agricultural era. Then she sprung the trap I should have seen coming, the financial death blow disguised as bureaucratic procedure. Rezoning from agricultural to residential would immediately reclassify my property taxes. Instead of the $2,800 annual agricultural rate that had sustained my family for decades, residential classification would catapult my tax bill to $11,200 per year. But here's the kicker that made my vision blur. The county would demand $47,000 in retroactive adjustments within 30 days, claiming I owed back taxes for the difference over the past 5 years. Even if I could somehow afford the quadrupled ongoing rates, that immediate $50,000 hammer blow would force me to sell the farm just to pay taxes on land that had been agricultural since before indoor plumbing. The realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't about zoning compliance or community standards. This was about financial assassination. Cordelia had studied my tax records, calculated my debt load from Martha's medical bills, and engineered the perfect economic execution. But I wasn't rolling over without a fight. I'd spent the weekend mobilizing every ally in my corner, and when my turn came to speak, I brought the cavalry. 87-year-old Mrs. Delilah Brewster rose from her seat like an avenging angel in sensible shoes. That razor-tongued retired librarian had been organizing resistance since Martha's funeral, and she'd come loaded for bear. I've lived in this county for 63 years, she declared, her voice carrying the moral authority of someone who'd buried 3 husbands and outlasted 4 mayors. And I've never witnessed such shameless land-grabbing disguised as community improvement. This farm has fed our families, supported our businesses, and preserved agricultural heritage, while that woman's McMansion development has brought nothing but traffic jams, noise complaints, and property taxes nobody can afford. The thunderous applause that followed could have rattled windows 3 blocks away. Mrs. Brewster had struck a nerve deeper than individual property rights. This was about rural identity versus suburban colonization. Restaurant owners testified about sourcing my heritage corn for their farm-to-table menus. The school superintendent explained how my farm provided irreplaceable educational opportunities. Even the county extension agent spoke about my role in preserving heirloom seed varieties that were vanishing elsewhere. Then Mrs. Brewster delivered her haymaker. These developers want to pave paradise and put up a parking lot, just like the old song says. But some of us remember when community meant something more than matching mailboxes and HOA tyranny. The room exploded. Someone started recording, and by evening, Mrs. Brewster's speech was viral across every local Facebook group in 3 counties, shared by farmers, teachers, and small business owners who recognized their own struggles in mine. Cordelia's response revealed just how deep her resources ran. She hired a land use attorney from Kansas City, some hotshot who arrived in a silver Porsche and immediately parked in the courthouse's only handicapped space. Police Chief Randy Coleman, who bought sweet corn from my stand every July, took great pleasure in writing that ticket while the lawyer was inside arguing against my livelihood. That attorney filed for environmental impact studies, claiming my organic farming practices somehow endangered Willowbrook's drinking water. The irony was suffocating. My sustainable methods were cleaner than most suburban lawn care routines, but defending against these bogus studies would cost another $15,000 I didn't have. The zoning battle stretched for months like a slow-motion torture session, Legal fees climbed past $25,000 while Cordelia's war chest seemed bottomless. I'd learned years back that Missouri's right to farm laws generally protect existing agricultural use from residential encroachment. But knowing the law and affording to enforce it were two different animals entirely. Every night I'd sit at Martha's kitchen table, staring at bills that grew faster than weeds, wondering if surrender might be the only sane choice left. While the zoning battle raged in meeting rooms and courthouses, Cordelia was orchestrating her most audacious move yet, one that would make her previous schemes look like amateur hour. She filed for what she called an Emergency Access Road Improvement Permit, claiming the HOA desperately needed an alternate route for emergency vehicles. The application landed on my kitchen table like a death warrant. According to the engineering plans, this emergency access would require a 40-foot wide corridor cutting straight through my cornfield, the exact same path where those orange survey stakes had appeared months earlier. What made my blood boil wasn't just the brazen land grab, but the timing. Cordelia had submitted these permits during the week between Christmas and New Year's, when half the county staff was nursing hangovers and the other half was somewhere tropical posting beach photos on Facebook. Her husband's law firm had connections throughout the permit office, and somehow this emergency classification bypassed every normal notification requirement. I learned about the approved permits the same morning heavy machinery arrived at dawn. The rumble of diesel engines vibrated through my bedroom floor at 5:30 a.m., jolting me awake with the kind of adrenaline surge that makes your heart feel like a jackhammer trying to bust through your ribs. Through my window, I watched a convoy of bulldozers, excavators, and dump trucks rolling across my cornfield like mechanized locusts. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with morning dew, creating an acrid fog that seemed to strangle the crisp January air. Orange construction cones had sprouted overnight like radioactive mushrooms, marking a destruction path that led directly toward the 200-year-old oak tree where I'd proposed to Martha 30 years ago. I threw on clothes and boots, stumbling outside to confront what looked like a coordinated military operation. The construction foreman, a weathered man named Pete Kowalski, seemed genuinely apologetic but showed me official county permits bearing yesterday's date and multiple signatures. "Look, Mr. Thornfield, I'm real sorry about this mess. We got the work order last night with instructions to start first thing this morning. Says here it's emergency access for fire trucks and ambulances." Pete handed me the permit documentation, his calloused fingers stained with years of honest labor. The paperwork looked legitimate. County seal, multiple signatures, detailed engineering specifications, but something stank worse than week-old fish about the whole setup. Emergency access for what? The HOA already has 2 entrances plus direct connection to County Road 47. "That's above my pay grade, sir. I just run equipment where the lawyers tell me. But if you can get a county stop work order, I'll shut down faster than a politician's promises." The mini twist came when I examined those permits under my kitchen light. Every signature belonged to county employees who were supposedly on vacation that week. The emergency justification cited inadequate emergency vehicle access during peak traffic periods, but Willowbrook had never experienced any response delays. Most damning, the permit application listed the wrong property identification number, a clerical error that had somehow escaped multiple levels of review. This wasn't bureaucratic incompetence. This was systematic permit fraud. I called the county emergency line, reporting fraudulent permit use and demanding immediate investigation. Then I grabbed my phone and started recording everything. The machinery operating without proper property owner consent. The destruction of crops representing months of work and thousands in lost income. The environmental damage to soil that had been organically maintained for 3 generations. By 8 a.m., I had Channel 7's Problem Solvers investigative team racing toward my farm. Reporter Sarah Martinez specialized in government corruption stories, and the combination of holiday permit fraud plus agricultural land grabbing lit up every instinct that made her dangerous to crooked officials. The TV crew arrived while bulldozers were still working, capturing real-time footage of heritage corn being destroyed for an access road nobody needed. Sarah interviewed me standing in what had been a thriving cornfield 12 hours earlier, with diesel smoke and machinery noise providing perfect backdrop for a David versus Goliath story. "Mr. Thornfield, how do you respond to claims that this emergency access road is necessary for public safety?" "Sarah, this HOA already has emergency access through 2 existing entrances that handle fire trucks just fine. What they're building isn't emergency access. It's the foundation for commercial development that Cordelia Ashworth Pemberton has been planning since she moved here." When Sarah tried interviewing Cordelia, She got nothing but attorney statements and slammed doors. The story led Channel 7's evening news with a headline that made me smile despite the devastation. HOA bulldozers target grieving farmers' heritage crops. The public response exploded like a social media volcano. Outrage against HOA overreach flooded comment sections. Local businesses posted signs supporting our farm. Farmers from 3 counties offered equipment, labor, and financial assistance. Agricultural publications and property rights organizations across the Midwest picked up the story. Most importantly, the county stopped all work pending permit review. By noon, those bulldozers sat silent while investigators examined the suspicious paperwork trail that had authorized the morning's destruction. Cordelia's defensive response revealed how desperate her timeline had become. Instead of apologizing for permit irregularities, she held an impromptu press conference claiming media coverage was one-sided anti-development propaganda designed to prevent reasonable community improvements. She actually suggested I was exploiting my wife's death for public sympathy and threatened lawsuits against Channel 7 for defamatory coverage damaging the HOA's reputation. The woman was doubling down on permit fraud while standing in front of illegally destroyed crops, threatening to sue people for reporting her crimes. Half my prized corn crop lay in ruins, churned into mud by tracks from machinery that should never have crossed my property line. Legal fees had devoured my savings like a financial cancer, pushing past $30,000 with no end visible. The physical and emotional toll was grinding me down faster than I wanted to admit. But late that night, standing beside Martha's oak tree that had somehow survived the day's assault, I made a decision that would flip this entire nightmare on its head. I'd been playing defense for months, reacting to Cordelia's attacks like a boxer trapped against the ropes. Time to start swinging back. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source, 73-year-old Harold Puckett, a county records clerk who'd been filing documents since Nixon was in diapers and computers were science fiction. Janet Morrison needed historical property records for our boundary dispute defense, so she sent me treasure hunting through the courthouse basement, where Harold ruled over 4 decades of accumulated paperwork, like a benevolent troll guarding municipal secrets. The basement smelled like old leather bindings mixed with that particular bureaucratic mustiness that comes from decades of government forms slowly decomposing in filing cabinets. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying insects, casting harsh shadows across metal cabinets that lined the walls like gray tombstones for dead legislation. "You're hunting for original subdivision plats, right?" Harold asked, his arthritic fingers dancing across cabinet labels with muscle memory precision. "Funny thing, I was just digging through these exact files last week when that fancy lawyer from Kansas City came sniffing around asking about Willowbrook development records. That caught my attention faster than a rattlesnake in a mailbox." Harold pulled a massive ledger that groaned under its own weight, spreading documents across a wooden table that probably predated electricity. "Here's your grandfather's original 1943 filing," he said, pointing to Ezra's careful signature. "But take a gander at this beauty from 5 years back, the Willowbrook Development Agreement that nobody seems to remember anymore." Harold extracted another file, thick with legal language and county stamps that looked official enough to frame. As I read Section 12, Subsection 4, the implications hit me like cold water on a fevered brain. The original development agreement included an agricultural buffer preservation clause, requiring the HOA to maintain a minimum 200-foot agricultural buffer between the development and existing farms. Any violation triggered automatic penalties of $2.3 million plus full environmental restoration costs. Cordelia wasn't just harassing me. She was systematically violating her own legally binding development agreement with every survey stake, zoning challenge, and permit application. "Harold, you're telling me she's contractually obligated to protect my farming operation?" His weathered face split into a grin that belonged in a poker game. "Son, that woman has been breaching her development contract since day one. Every attack on your property is documented evidence of willful violation." But Harold wasn't finished dropping bombshells. He pulled the HOA's financial filings, public records revealing fiscal catastrophe that made my farming struggles look manageable. The association carried $1.8 million in debt from Cordelia's amenity spending spree. An oversized clubhouse nobody used, a pool that cost more than most houses, tennis courts that sat empty except when she posed for social media photos. "Monthly fees tripled in 2 years. Harold noted, scanning the numbers like a detective reading evidence. "Residents are lawyering up over financial mismanagement. The HOA is basically bankrupt. Just keeping up appearances until someone figures out the books don't balance. Then he produced the smoking gun that made everything click into place. Commercial development contracts filed just weeks ago showed Cordelia secretly negotiating with Midwest shopping centers for a $3.2 million sale of the exact agricultural buffer she was required to preserve. She needs your land cleared for this deal to close, Harold explained, organizing documents with librarian efficiency. The shopping center developer's been funding her legal war through shell companies. She's not just stealing your farm, she's using it to bail out the HOA debt and pocket a hefty consulting fee. The scope of Cordelia's scheme was breathtaking in its audacity. She'd bankrupted the HOA with vanity projects, then engineered a massive land grab disguised as community improvement to fund her bailout. My family's 80-year heritage was just collateral damage in her personal financial recovery plan. Harold's insider knowledge revealed corruption reaching deep into county government. Cordelia's husband's firm had represented the original developer, creating conflicts of interest in every legal action. The planning director who'd approved her fraudulent permits was their former employee. Even the surveyor who'd planted those orange stakes worked exclusively for developments connected to her husband's firm. It's a web that explains how she's gotten away with this long, Harold said. But webs have weak points, and this one's about to collapse under its own weight. I wasn't defending against random HOA harassment anymore. I was sitting on evidence that could bankrupt Cordelia's operation and expose systematic corruption. The agricultural buffer violation alone gave me legal weapons that could flip this entire war. But I also understood why she'd been so vicious. She was fighting for financial survival as desperately as I was fighting for my land. The commercial development had to close by March 31st for the developer's financing to remain valid, giving her exactly 8 weeks to complete the land grab. As I copied every document with Harold's patient assistance, a plan began forming that would let Cordelia think she was winning right up until the moment I destroyed her completely. She wanted to play games with legal paperwork? Time to show her what happens when farmers start reading the fine print. Armed with Harold's explosive evidence, I called an emergency meeting with Janet Morrison at her law office. She took one look at the agricultural buffer violation documentation and let out a whistle that could have summoned hunting dogs from the next county. "Jeb, this changes everything. We're not playing defense anymore. We're about to drop a legal nuclear bomb on Cordelia's entire operation." Janet spread the documents across her conference table like a general planning D-Day. The agricultural buffer clause was an automatic death sentence for any HOA that violated it. Unlike other contract disputes that could drag through courts for years while lawyers got rich, this carried mandatory penalties that took priority over every other debt the HOA owed. "Here's our battle plan," Janet explained, her legal mind already calculating moves like a chess grandmaster. "We document every single buffer zone violation, build an airtight case for willful breach, then trigger the penalty assessment at the exact moment that causes maximum pain to Cordelia's timeline." But I couldn't wage this war alone. My first call went to Mrs. Delilah Brewster, who answered her phone like she'd been waiting months for marching orders. "About time you stopped playing victim and started fighting back," she declared, with the satisfaction of someone who'd been sharpening knives for this exact moment. "What's our first target?" Mrs. Brewster became my intelligence coordinator, transforming her kitchen into mission control using 40 years of library research skills that made the CIA look amateur. Her table disappeared under charts, timelines, and color-coded evidence files that tracked every HOA violation, suspicious permit, and questionable financial transaction with military precision. Harold Puckett provided inside county information during lunch breaks, sharing intelligence about permit applications, zoning requests, and development deals that crossed his desk. His 4 decades of institutional memory revealed patterns and connections that would take outsiders years to discover, if they ever figured them out at all. Marcus Webb at the Millbrook Gazette became our media warfare specialist, investigating financial relationships between Cordelia's husband's law firm, the original developer, and Midwest shopping centers. His journalism background helped us understand how to build stories that would generate maximum public outrage and political pressure. The Farmers Association contributed their legal defense fund, $15,000, that felt like winning the lottery after months of bleeding money. But more importantly, they provided credibility and moral authority. This wasn't just one grieving farmer fighting suburban bullies. This was agricultural heritage under coordinated assault. Janet explained our financial strategy using simple math that even stressed-out farmers could follow. The $2.3 million agricultural buffer penalty plus environmental restoration costs would total approximately $3.1 million. These penalties legally jumped ahead of every other debt, forcing immediate HOA bankruptcy with insufficient assets to cover obligations. The beautiful thing about development agreement violations, Janet noted while flipping through precedent cases that made my head spin, is that they survive bankruptcy proceedings. Environmental and agricultural restoration penalties typically can't be discharged, so personal liability follows the perpetrators even if their organization dissolves. Our evidence-gathering operation would have impressed a military surveillance unit. I installed trail cameras throughout the property to document every construction vehicle, surveyor, and trespasser who crossed my land. Time-lapse photography captured systematic buffer zone destruction in high-definition detail. GPS mapping showed precisely how much legally protected agricultural land had been illegally converted for development. Mrs. Brewster organized neighborhood information sessions, revealing to shocked Willowbrook residents that their monthly fees were funding legal attacks on neighboring farms. Many had no idea about the HOA's hidden debt or Cordelia's secret commercial development scheme that could collapse their property values if agricultural protections disappeared. The Farmers Association planned a courthouse demonstration, bringing together agricultural advocates from across Missouri. Television coverage would pressure county officials to investigate permit fraud and development agreement violations while showing voters exactly which politicians were protecting corrupt developers over family farms. Marcus Webb developed our social media strategy, creating shareable content that documented HOA overreach and heritage preservation. His #SaveThornfieldFarm hashtag gained traction among property rights organizations nationwide, generating support from farmers who recognized their own struggles in mind. But our most crucial preparation involved building the ironclad legal case that would trigger maximum penalties. Janet arranged professional surveys showing exact acreage of buffer zone destruction, environmental assessments quantifying restoration costs, and forensic audits proving the HOA's inability to pay mandated penalties. "We're not just winning a property dispute," she explained during one late-night strategy session powered by coffee and righteous anger. "We're establishing precedent for agricultural protection while exposing systematic corruption that reaches deep into county government." Timing was everything. We needed Cordelia's violations to accumulate until her commercial development deal reached the point of no return. More destruction meant higher penalties and stronger criminal cases. Waiting until financing deadlines created maximum pressure with zero room for escape. Our backup strategies covered every possible countermove Cordelia might attempt. If the HOA tried bankruptcy, agricultural penalties survived discharge. If board members resigned to avoid liability, personal responsibility for willful violations followed them home. If county officials stalled investigations, state agricultural departments could step in with enforcement authority. The plan even included federal oversight triggers. Construction activities near protected wetlands could bring EPA involvement with criminal prosecution powers beyond state jurisdiction. As we refined our strategy over several weeks that felt like military training exercises, I realized this fight had evolved beyond personal property disputes. We were challenging a corruption system that used legal complexity and financial pressure to crush individual rights. Victory would protect not just my farm, but establish safeguards for agricultural communities across the region. Mrs. Brewster captured our mission perfectly. We're not just fighting one entitled suburbanite. We're proving that money and political connections don't override legal obligations and community values. Everything was ready. Evidence documented, allies mobilized, legal strategy bulletproof. Now we just had to let Cordelia provide enough rope to hang herself and half the county officials enabling her crimes. Cordelia's desperation became palpable as February deadlines approached and her commercial development timeline started crumbling like week-old biscuits. With media attention intensifying and county investigations mounting, she shifted from legal maneuvering to outright intimidation, a tactical error that would provide the final evidence needed to destroy her completely. The sabotage started small but escalated with the precision of a military campaign. Security consultants appeared around my property, installing surveillance cameras on utility poles that faced my farm with all the subtlety of prison guard towers. These weren't county cameras or legitimate security measures. They were private investigators hired to monitor my daily routine and document anything that could be twisted into violations. Then my 40-year-old John Deere, Old Blue, mysteriously died during routine winter maintenance. The engine seized completely, and when Pete's repair shop investigated, they discovered sugar crystallized throughout the fuel system like diabetic snow. Someone had dumped enough sweetener into my gas tank to transform the engine into $8,000 worth of expensive scrap metal. Never seen destruction this deliberate except in nasty divorce cases, Pete told me, shaking his head over the ruined machinery. Whoever did this understood engines well enough to cause maximum damage. This wasn't teenage vandalism. This was professional sabotage. The acrid smell of burnt sugar and metallic death still lingered in Pete's garage as he showed me photos of internal carnage that looked like battlefield surgery gone wrong. Replacing the engine would consume money earmarked for legal fees, creating exactly the financial pressure Cordelia intended. But her intimidation campaign extended beyond property damage. Anonymous letters materialized in my mailbox like poisonous flowers, typed on plain paper without signatures, warning me to drop legal action before accidents become more serious. The threats were carefully worded to avoid criminal charges while being specific enough to disrupt sleep and peace of mind. My roadside produce stand became a weekly target. Twice I arrived at dawn to find vegetables scattered like confetti, cash register smashed beyond repair, and hand-painted signs reduced to kindling. County sheriff's deputies took reports with the enthusiasm of men filling out tax forms, admitting they had no leads and couldn't provide protection for every farm business in the county. Mrs. Brewster wasn't spared retaliation either. Her car tires were professionally slashed the morning after she delivered another barn-burning speech at a county meeting, forcing the 87-year-old to rely on her grandson for transportation. The message resonated clearly. Supporting Jeb Thornfield brought consequences to anyone brave enough to take a stand. Even local businesses that had publicly supported our cause faced surprise health inspections from county officials who'd shown zero previous interest in their operations. The timing was suspicious enough to make paranoids seem reasonable. These were punitive visits designed to pressure my allies into abandoning ship. The mini-twist arrived when Cordelia's husband made an unannounced evening visit, appearing at my kitchen door like an expensive undertaker. Attorney David Pemberton embodied corporate menace. Tailored suit worth more than my annual income, leather briefcase that probably cost more than most cars, and a smile that could refrigerate July. "Jeb, let's discuss this situation like reasonable adults," he said, spreading documents across my table with the presumption of someone accustomed to owning every room he entered. "My client is prepared to offer $2.1 million for your entire property. That's extremely generous considering current legal uncertainties. The offer was strategically calculated, enough to eliminate my debts while providing substantial profit, but below market value for heritage farmland adjacent to commercial development. More crucially, selling would eliminate agricultural buffer protections and clear the path for Cordelia's shopping center deal. Consider the practical realities," David continued, his tone mixing fake concern with barely concealed threat. "Continuing this fight could bankrupt you regardless of eventual outcomes. Legal fees alone will consume whatever settlement you might win. And frankly, property maintenance accidents seem to be increasing around here lately." That final line obliterated every boundary of professional legal behavior, but David Pemberton had made a fatal miscalculation. I was wearing a wire. Thanks to Janet Morrison's insistence on documentation and Missouri's one-party consent recording laws, every word was being preserved in digital clarity. David's admission that buffer violations were intentional, his revelation about secret commercial developer funding, and his witness intimidation threats were all captured for prosecutor review. "I appreciate the offer," I replied, maintaining steady composure despite wanting to escort him off my land with a pitchfork. "But this farm represents 4 generations of family heritage. That legacy isn't negotiable at any price." David's corporate mask slipped momentarily, exposing desperation lurking beneath expensive polish. "You're making a serious error in judgment, Jeb. Things could become very challenging if you persist. Property disputes drag on indefinitely, and maintenance costs for aging agricultural operations can be surprisingly catastrophic." After his departure, I immediately delivered the recording to Janet Morrison and filed police reports documenting attempted bribery and witness intimidation. The audio provided evidence of conspiracy, intentional development violations, and criminal threats that would follow David and Cordelia through federal court regardless of civil case outcomes. But rather than retreating, Cordelia's harassment campaign intensified like a cornered animal fighting for survival. She spread community rumors about my financial instability and grief-induced mental breakdown, claiming I posed safety risks requiring county intervention to declare the farm a public nuisance. The final escalation came when construction crews returned under cover of darkness, working without permits to accelerate buffer zone destruction before investigations could halt progress. Industrial floodlights transformed my peaceful cornfield into something resembling a maximum security prison, while heavy machinery rumbled until sunrise like mechanical thunder. Most devastating was watching chainsaws attack the 200-year-old oak where I'd proposed to Martha 3 decades earlier. That ancient tree was specifically protected in the original development agreement, making its destruction a federal environmental crime beyond state jurisdiction. Standing in pre-dawn darkness, watching Martha's favorite tree fall while hidden cameras recorded every moment, I realized Cordelia had finally provided enough evidence to end this war permanently. Time to spring the trap that would send her to federal prison. Cordelia's panic reached fever pitch when she learned about my upcoming press conference through her dwindling network of county contacts. With her commercial development deal scheduled to close in 3 weeks and FBI investigators circling like buzzards, she launched a final desperate offensive that would provide prosecutors with enough evidence to lock her away until the next ice age. The midnight board meeting was pure Cordelia theater, scheduled for 11 p.m. on a Wednesday with notifications sent only to board members she could manipulate. Derek Hutchinson, a retired accountant who'd moved to Willowbrook seeking quiet suburban retirement, attended out of civic duty despite growing suspicions about financial irregularities that made his CPA training twitch. What Derek discovered that night would shatter Cordelia's criminal enterprise like a sledgehammer hitting crystal. Emergency financial restructuring, the hastily printed agenda proclaimed, though Derek immediately noticed the numbers didn't match any previous reports. Revenue appeared magically inflated. Expenses had vanished like morning fog, and debt obligations had been reclassified with creative accounting that would have impressed Enron executives. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like mechanical cicadas as Derek adjusted his reading glasses, trying to decipher documents designed to confuse rather than illuminate. The financial statements told a story of manipulation so brazen it bordered on comedic if the consequences weren't so serious. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cordelia announced with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences, "we have a transformative opportunity to resolve our community's challenges through strategic development partnerships." She produced what she claimed was an updated development agreement, eliminating agricultural buffer requirements through county approval. But Derek's trained eye spotted problems immediately. Creation dates were recent despite claims of historical legitimacy, signatures looked suspiciously uniform, and county seals appeared photocopied rather than embossed. The devastating twist came when Derek cross-referenced Cordelia's financial projections against actual banking records accessible through his treasurer responsibilities. According to her presentation, the HOA was financially stable with manageable debt. Reality showed an organization bleeding money like a severed artery, hemorrhaging cash through legal fees, construction overruns, and mysterious consulting expenses. Most shocking was a footnote Derek almost missed, revealing that Midwest shopping centers had already paid Cordelia a $500,000 facilitation fee for arranging the land acquisition. This money had disappeared into accounts controlled by her husband's law firm rather than benefiting the HOA that was supposedly being saved. Derek activated his phone's recording function, capturing Cordelia's casual admission that the development deal was essentially finalized pending resolution of minor access complications. She actually referred to my family's 80-year heritage farm as minor access complications, requiring expedited legal resolution. County officials have assured us that remaining agricultural restrictions will be administratively resolved once current environmental reviews conclude, she continued, apparently unaware that those environmental reviews were federal criminal investigations into wetland destruction and systematic development agreement violations. Board member Patricia Williams raised concerns about residents facing foreclosure due to tripled monthly fees. Cordelia dismissed these worries with aristocratic disdain, claiming commercial development revenue would eliminate resident fees entirely within 2 years. Once retail operations commence, our community achieves financial independence through lease income streams, she promised, ignoring that her shopping center required destroying federally protected buffer zones and would face decades of environmental litigation. Derek's accounting background recognized classic embezzlement patterns throughout Cordelia's financial manipulations. Funds had been shuffled between accounts to hide losses. Revenue was artificially inflated through loans disguised as income, and expenses were creatively reclassified to obscure the true scope of fiscal catastrophe. The forgery became laughably obvious under scrutiny. Modern computer fonts on documents supposedly created 5 years earlier, identical digital signatures across multiple officials, and county seals that didn't match legitimate specimens on file made this look like amateur hour at fraud school. After the meeting, Derek immediately contacted Mrs. Brewster, sharing recordings and financial analysis that painted a picture of corruption so comprehensive it belonged in federal textbooks. Within hours, evidence was flowing to Janet Morrison. Harold Puckett confirmed no updated development agreements existed in county records, and Marcus Webb was crafting an exposé that would obliterate Cordelia's remaining credibility. Cordelia's response to mounting pressure revealed just how unhinged she'd become. Construction crews worked around the clock, destroying agricultural buffer zones, racing to complete irreversible environmental damage before injunctions could stop them. She filed false police reports claiming I posed community safety threats through increasingly erratic behavior. The counterfeit permits reached levels of fraud so obvious they insulted everyone's intelligence. Emergency road maintenance authorizations justified commercial construction, agricultural exemptions covered retail development, and environmental waivers bore forged signatures from officials who'd never seen the applications. Her paranoia manifested in hiring additional private investigators to surveil Derek, Mrs. Brewster, and anyone suspected of opposition. She attempted accessing county computer systems to alter historical records, a federal cybercrime that added decades to her potential prison sentence. Most desperately, she spread rumors throughout the development about outside environmental extremists infiltrating the community to destroy property values through radical agricultural activism. Residents were beginning to wonder if their HOA president had completely lost touch with reality. Environmental damage was now visible from space, through satellite imagery showing systematic destruction of federally protected areas. EPA investigators were building criminal cases that would result in prison sentences lasting longer than some presidential administrations. Derek's financial forensics revealed that even if Cordelia's land grab succeeded completely, the HOA lacked resources to pay agricultural buffer violation penalties. The $3.1 million assessment would bankruptcy the organization while leaving individual board members personally liable for amounts that would destroy their personal finances. As I reviewed Derek's evidence that night, I realized Cordelia had finally provided everything needed to end this war decisively. Every forged document, every fraudulent permit, every intimidation attempt was documented and preserved for federal prosecutors who specialized in making white-collar criminals disappear into the prison system. The perfect storm was brewing. Time to unleash it. The perfect storm converged on Saturday, March 15th, when 3 separate events collided like freight trains at a rural intersection. My press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the county courthouse. Cordelia had called an emergency HOA annual meeting for 2 p.m. to ram through her commercial development vote, and federal environmental investigators were arriving to serve criminal warrants based on our evidence. Marcus Webb's weekend expose hit every driveway in the county at dawn, with a front-page headline that made my coffee taste sweeter. HOA President's $3. 1 million fraud exposed. Federal investigators target development scheme. The article laid out Derek's financial analysis, Harold's documentation of permit fraud, and audio excerpts from David Pemberton's recorded intimidation attempts. By 8 a.m., my phone was ringing like a fire station alarm. Residents who'd been kept in the dark about their HOA's true financial condition were demanding answers. Reporters from 3 states were requesting interviews, and agricultural organizations were offering legal support for what they recognized as a landmark property rights case. The courthouse steps at 10 a.m. looked like a political rally crossed with a farmer's market. Mrs. Brewster had organized a delegation of agricultural advocates, local business owners, and Willowbrook residents who'd finally learned the truth about their HOA's criminal activities. Camera crews from 4 television stations positioned themselves for maximum drama as I approached the microphone cluster that bristled like electronic wheat. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying across the crowd of nearly 200 supporters, "what you're witnessing isn't just one farmer's fight against an abusive HOA. This is about systematic corruption that reaches from suburban developments into county government, using legal complexity to steal private property and destroy agricultural heritage." The sound of camera shutters clicking created a percussion backdrop as I presented the timeline of harassment, intimidation, and fraud that had consumed 8 months of my life. Each revelation, the forged permits, the embezzled funds, the environmental crimes, generated audible gasps from residents who were learning about their HOA's activities for the first time. Today I'm filing a formal complaint seeking $3. 1 million in agricultural buffer violation penalties, I announced, holding up the legal documents that would bankrupt Cordelia's operation. These penalties take priority over every other debt the HOA owes, and they cannot be discharged through bankruptcy proceedings. The crowd erupted in applause that could be heard 3 blocks away, but the real fireworks were just beginning. At exactly 10:47 a.m., while I was still answering reporters' questions, federal EPA investigators arrived with a convoy of government vehicles that looked like a presidential security detail. Agent Sarah Emerson stepped out of the lead SUV carrying warrants for environmental crimes, financial fraud, and racketeering charges that would put Cordelia and her conspirators away for decades. "Mr. Thornfield," Agent Emerson announced loudly enough for every microphone to capture, "the Environmental Protection Agency is issuing immediate cease and desist orders for all construction activities on agricultural buffer zones. We're also executing federal warrants for criminal violations of environmental protection laws and development agreements." The media feeding frenzy that followed looked like sharks discovering a school of wounded fish. Reporters were calling this the biggest rural corruption scandal in Missouri history, with implications for agricultural protection nationwide. But the afternoon HOA meeting promised to be the real spectacle. Willowbrook's community clubhouse was packed beyond fire code capacity by 2 p.m., with overflow crowds gathered outside listening through open windows. Residents who'd been kept ignorant about their HOA's financial disaster finally had access to Derek's forensic analysis and Marcus Webb's investigative reporting. Cordelia arrived in dark sunglasses like a celebrity avoiding paparazzi, flanked by her husband David and 2 attorneys who looked expensive enough to fund a small war. Her usual confident demeanor had cracked, replaced by the desperate energy of someone watching their world collapse in real time. "This emergency meeting will address malicious rumors and coordinated attacks on our community's leadership," she began, her voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. "Outside agitators have spread false information designed to damage property values and prevent reasonable development." Derek Hutchinson stood up with the moral authority of someone who'd uncovered massive fraud. "Cordelia, I've reviewed our actual financial records and residents deserve to know the truth. We're carrying $1. $8 million in debt from your vanity projects. Monthly fees have tripled to fund legal attacks on neighboring farms, and you've personally received $500,000 in secret payments from commercial developers." The room exploded with angry voices demanding explanations. Residents realized they'd been funding Cordelia's war against my farm while facing foreclosure from tripled HOA fees. Harold Puckett entered the meeting carrying a box of county records that would provide the final death blow. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with the satisfaction of someone who'd waited 40 years to expose this level of corruption, "I'm here to present official documentation proving systematic violation of your development agreement." He spread the agricultural buffer preservation clause across the front table like evidence in a murder trial. "This clause requires maintaining agricultural protection for neighboring farms. Violation triggers automatic penalties of $3. $1 million plus restoration costs that your HOA cannot pay." Cordelia's desperate response revealed how completely she'd lost control. "These are technical legal details that don't concern residents," she claimed, apparently unaware that bankruptcy and personal liability absolutely concerned everyone present. That's when Sheriff Randy Coleman entered with federal agents, carrying arrest warrants that turned the community meeting into a crime scene. "Cordelia Ashworth Pemberton, you're under arrest for environmental crimes, fraud, and racketeering conspiracy." The sight of Cordelia being handcuffed in front of 200 horrified residents while news cameras rolled provided the perfect ending to 8 months of harassment and intimidation. Her designer sunglasses fell off as she was led away, and someone in the crowd actually started applauding. "David Pemberton, you're also under arrest for conspiracy, witness intimidation, and violation of attorney professional conduct," Agent Emerson continued, creating a legal disaster that would destroy the entire criminal enterprise. As the meeting dissolved into chaos with residents demanding emergency elections and financial audits, I found myself standing at the same podium where Cordelia had terrorized so many people for so long. "Friends and neighbors," I said, my voice carrying over the stunned crowd. "This doesn't have to end our community. We can build something better, a place where agricultural heritage and suburban development coexist with respect and transparency, instead of corruption and intimidation." The thunderous applause that followed felt like redemption not just for my family's farm, but for everyone who'd ever been bullied by corrupt authority figures who thought money and connections placed them above the law. Justice had finally arrived in Willowbrook Estates. Justice moved swiftly once federal prosecutors took control. Cordelia received 18 months in